right now disillusioned by all democratic processes. Well, it seems South Africans are open to being led by a dictator on condition that he or she fixes the country's woes. This is the finding from a survey presented by Afrobarometer at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. I'm joined now by Dr. Nomsa Masuku from the IEC, as well as Dr. Benjamin Roberts. He's the research director of the Human Sciences Research Council. Thank you very much to both of you, docs, for your time here, and good afternoon. Dr. Masuku, I'm just going to start with you in terms of the fact that this report also involves, research that the IEC did, I suspect, trying to make sure that you understand the behavior of voters because of how voter turnout has been declining in the past few years. Is that correct?
Not quite. The Electoral Commission did not conduct the research. The Electoral Commission commissioned the HSRC to conduct the research. So that's more accurate.
Yeah. So basically, because you commissioned them to do the research, was it on the basis of the fact that you're trying to understand the behavior of the South African electorate because of the trends that you've seen in the past couple of years every time it's a voting year?
Amongst other things, the research that we've commissioned, we've been doing so since the late 2000s. We collect data to help us interpret how we can better service the electorate. And then what we were launching is a trend analysis of the behavior of voters or the citizens of the country over a period of time.
And Dr. Roberts, what were the findings, amongst other things, when you, were commissioned to actually do this report? What were South Africans telling you about democracy and whether they still trust it?
Well, as Dr. Masuku has indicated, we're looking at long-term trends in attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, and understanding how those are unfolding, particularly in the lead-up to particular specific electoral contexts. So if I start at the beginning, what we saw is we looked at a set of democratic attitudes, which really gives the sense of the context in which elections occur. And in that particular aspect of our analysis, we've shown that there has been an especial decline in different aspects of democratic evaluations, from the general sense of national pride to satisfaction with democracy to the evaluations of the performance of a range of core political institutions. And what we've seen, particularly on that latter point, is that in terms of institutional trust, there has been this very strong pull-down effect based on the aspects of democracy that South Africans are particularly concerned about, including their general evaluation of the functioning of democracy as a whole. We then, secondly, looked at what the general electoral attitudes are, and that includes aspects such as the sense of the duty to vote, and that typically has been part of the good news story. It's been fairly robust and quite high throughout the population until I would say around 2015, 2017, when they showed signs of a slight decline, but it still is around the 60% mark of South African citizens believe in the inherent duty of all citizens to come out and cast their ballot, which is, as I say, part of the good news story. The things that are a little more critical in this space are especially an inherent sense of what we call political efficacy. That is a sense, firstly, that my vote makes a difference, and secondly, that the elected act in the interests of the elected. And on both those aspects of political efficacy, we've seen quite a significant decline over time. And so it is a particular worry. While that duty to vote is still there, there is this fundamental questioning about the way the electoral outcomes works in the interests of the voters. The final part of what we looked at was, are voters on elections days themselves happy with the operational management of elections by the Electoral Commission? And there is really probably the most positive aspect of all, that the IEC is rated very highly across a range of areas of its performance in the electoral process on the day, and voting stations and queuing times, and the conduct of electoral staff, and ultimately the fairness of the election. So there's this increasing disjuncture between the views of voters and the views, this disillusionment that we're talking about as part of the broader electorates, quite a few who have chosen to exit or abstain from elections.
Yeah. And Dr. Masuku, I mean, this should be very concerning to see that through the years that this research has been done, people who feel that they would rather forgo democracy that was so hard-earned are increasing to now 25% from your 20.9% back in 2018, etc. You know, what is it that the IEC can do in terms of its mandate to assist with this issue? We all know that this comes from the fact that South Africans are becoming more and more despondent because of what we're seeing in the news. When it comes to our leaders.
Okay. Thank you very much. Look, if you could just allow me to reference the article that brought us here, which claims that the finding was that South Africans would much rather have a dictatorship. I think that is stretching it too far. I think what you've just said is much more accurate. It says the finding is actually that the South African public would be happy to explore other alternatives to democracy in order to feel happier with the political system. I think that is a much more accurate representation of the finding. Yes.
And you know,
and then in terms of what. And then in terms of what the Electoral Commission can do, I think what is also very clear from the finding is that the Electoral Commission ranks very high in terms of the procedural things that it is mandated to do, that it has been able to do. The finding is that potential voters are staying away from the polls, not because of the Electoral Commission, but because of what is on offer to choose. So the dissatisfaction is not about the Electoral Commission, it is about the people, the entities that present themselves as choices to be chosen by the voters. The voters are saying, we don't like the choices, even if I don't like my particular political party. Instead of shopping around for another political party, I'd much rather exit. That we call it an exit, which means that I'd much rather stay home and not participate, other than shopping around. So that is the accurate finding.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly how I read it. That you know, people who feel that maybe there should be an alternative in terms of our voting system to democracy, maybe they should look at that, because so far, you know, they don't trust that they no longer trust that democracy really is working for everyone. So now, Dr. Roberts, you know, looking at the fact that there's also a finding that you made that there are people who have the perception that they don't trust Parliament are also growing. It looks like people are saying that Parliament is not really fulfilling its mandate and being out there. All those leaders who have been given a mandate to lead the country are not really doing what they're supposed to. Could it be because of what we're seeing happening in Parliament at the moment? Every time there's supposed to be a sitting, there's a lot of hackling first instead of the discussions around the problems we faced and solutions around those particular problems.
I think what we shouldn't do is just isolate Parliament as a particular institution. There has been a decline, as I indicated, in trust in a range of political institutions. Parliament just happens to be one of them. We see it also in national government, but generally even the courts and so on. There is this strong decline that has been occurring. It really goes back to part of what Dr. Masuku said, which is this fundamental what are the expectations of citizens about what democracy will deliver, and do they evaluate as democracy as actually living up to the promise? And I think that's where there's some element of a disconnect. And I think it's why we've seen the rise particularly of protest politics in our society. It's why we're also seeing probably as a reflection of sheer frustration, these responses around an acceptance of more authoritarian forms, brands of politics, as if it meant that they would get some form of material outcome relative to their social needs. And I think it is about that disillusionment and frustration with the way in which elected are responding to these varied needs and interests. And I think we also have to look, that's not specific to South Africa, it's a global phenomenon. We're seeing a global democratic recession occurring, and South Africa is not immune to those global dynamics. And we've seen the rise of authoritarian and populism around different parts of the world. And so I think I see some of those Afrobarometer results as something of a cautionary note that we need to be careful, pay heed to the fact that there are a lot of dissatisfied Democrats out there who have real expectations of what democracy will provide and who feel that it is not living up to those promises, and by extension are giving quite harsh evaluations in different aspects of their democratic and indeed electoral attitudes.
Well, I guess political parties and Parliament itself has about 2 years to get their houses in order. And clearly, South Africans are saying no more talk, action. We want to see these services in our homes, on our streets, and then we can make an informed decision in 2024. Thank you very much to the both of you for speaking to us here on eNCA. That was, of course, Dr. Nomsa Masuku from the IEC, as well as Dr. Benjamin Roberts. He's the Research Director at the Human Sciences Research Council.